Hey everyone, this is James here. Today I am going to be continuing my walk through Sergio Martino's Giallis from the early 70s with Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key from 1972. This is the fourth film we're talking about from Sergio Martino from this period. It's also the fourth film that he did, another production from Luciano Martino, his brother, written by Ernesto Castaldi, bringing back a lot of the same collaborators. So Bruno Nicolai coming back to score this one. You got Edwidge back. You don't actually have George Hilton in this one, but you have Enid Strindberg and Luigi Pistoia coming from Case of Scorpion's Tail. So a lot of the same familiar cast. And this time it's a little different. It's not the jet set, different settings that we have. Instead, this is set in kind of like this rural Italian village. Really, really beautiful location. But before we get too far into the film, let's talk a bit about the synopsis. Real quickly, I just stole this from Letterboxd. Oliviero is a drunk, burned-out writer who amuses himself by hosting orgies at his grand country manor and humiliating his wife Irina. When a number of women are murdered in a grisly fashion, Oliviero becomes a prime suspect. Okay, so this one, like a lot of the Martino Gialli, has a pretty good reputation. It is also notable for its super long title. It's definitely one of the titles that a lot of people will cite as like one of the more ridiculous Gialli titles. And it's actually taken straight from Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, as I'm sure a lot of you already know. And Martino, in talking about the title, is saying that he noticed that phrase, "Your vice is a locked room and only I have the key," drew a lot of attention, and so he actually just took that phrase and made it into the title. Like a lot of Martino's Giallis, I really like this because, he doesn't make the same film. Instead, he takes the kind of Giallo template, he molds it with something else, and then something else comes out of it. So a lot of credit should definitely go to the writer as well, Ernesto Castaldi, who scripted a lot of these different films. So all these ones, he's just trying to do something a little different. So even though he's working with very similar collaborators, similar ingredients, stirs up that pot and you get something different. So this one is his Black Cat adaptation. Should and why to watch this? Well, yes, you should, definitely. Like all of Martino's Giallo, it's a kind of very good example of the genre, and I think well above average. It's actually, interestingly, the third most seen on Letterboxd of his Gialli, more than Ward. So kind of smack dab there in the middle. Okay, so let's get into it a bit. One thing that's interesting that I was thinking about this one, because I watched the Michael McKenzie feature in the Arrow Blu-ray, is the talk of F Giallo versus M Giallo. And so Martino is someone where I think you could classify a lot of his Giallo as F Giallo. Some are a little bit ambiguous, so like Case of the Scorpion's Tail, you could say that's a male one too, but Anita Strindberg also does a fair amount of leading in that one as well. So unlike Argento at the time, who, if we think about it, his Gialli in particular really, really focused on a lot of male protagonists. All of the Animal trilogy, Deep Red, Tenebrae, it's really not until, debatably, Opera or Phenomena that he really has an actual F-led Gialli. So at the time, really, really kind of doing more of the male-led ones, which have fairly different feels. The F-led ones have a lot more of that kind of gaslighting narrative that goes on, and often a female, in the case of a couple of the earlier ones, Fennec being terrified. And what's fun about this one is it's twisted a little bit, and that allows Fennec to have a lot more fun. They talk about in the back of the Arrow Blu-ray, it's like Fennec in her first bad girl role. And, to some extent that's true. She is playing kind of a little bit of a different character, and she is having a lot more fun in this role. It's a lot more interesting rather than her just being just tortured and terrified for the 90 minutes or whatever. Instead, it's Anita Strindberg that gets to play that role. I'm usually not that big on Black Cat adaptation, so I think this one might be my favorite, and I do like how it just kind of takes that as a template, and while you know kind of where it's going, if you know the story of the Black Cat, which a lot of people do, but it uses it, and it's very creative in how it uses kind of the constraints of that thing, of the Black Cat origin story from Poe to create something, very, very unique. Sort of like a Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward 2, this one also uses the serial killer sort of like that, where we sort of twist this Argento mode of this kind of black glove killer, where we have it, we're using it for a bit, and then almost like way before you'd expect it, 40 to 45 minutes in, we have the serial killer being caught. and so it really, really twists that mode into being just something a little bit different. And so you could interpret that a lot of ways, and one way you could be like, okay, it's sort of Martino riffing on Argento, and then gets sort of a little bored with it, and then just kind of doing his own thing. This film, I think, more than any of the Martino ones, really has very, very clear acts to it. And in my opinion, the acts, they grow in strength as it goes on. The first act in particular, we get introduced to the serial killer. We also get introduced to Pistilli and Strindberg, who have a terrible relationship. And Pistilli is a really, really good actor, but he always portrays misery and kind of misanthropy in a very, very, very well. But he's not exactly what I would call like a fun character. So he's not exactly like George Hilton, who is kind of like this suave, handsome guy with a smile on his face, who is a lot more fun a lot of the time. So you could see Pistilli as kind of like this old, decaying class of kind of aristocracy, like famous mother, like this big, gorgeous villa. But he just excels at playing kind of these miserable son of a bitches, terrible characters who may or may not be the killer, but you know that they're just a terrible human being. Strindberg is also good here. Definitely a very different role from Case of a Scorpion's Tail, and she's one person that gets a little bit unsung as far as like the Gialli female protagonist. But she's really good here, and it kind of shows her range that she could play more of the fun reporter with a smile on her face in Case of a Scorpion's Tail, and then go on and play basically the role that you would have thought Fennec would be playing here, of the woman that is just kind of the tortured and just mistreated consistently by her husband. And I will be spoiling this film, so do turn it off if you are interested in watching this film and you haven't seen it. I do highly recommend people see it. But at the end, when the twist is revealed and she's revealed to have been kind of the mastermind of it all, she finally gets to kind of let loose and have her moment, and it's really, really kind of a joy to watch. So her journey and the character that she has here, I think, is portrayed very well by Gastaldi and Martino. So really like kind of just her basic character arc. We have some kind of basic Freudian pop psychology stuff here with Luigi Pistilli and his mother issues. At times, this one is kind of the most Argento, the opening credits and things like that, the focus on little different objects and pieces, some of the set pieces, especially early on with the serial killings. Those feel fairly Argento-like at times as well, keeping in mind that the only Argento Gialli we'd had at this point were the Animal trilogy, and he'd yet to kind of really kind of kick off with his big ones like Deep Red and Tenebrae. So the second act, we get in kind of the familiar Gialli territory, and it's at this point that we get introduced to both Fennec and Rasimov, so these very familiar faces if you've seen the other Martino Gialli. I think it's kind of fun to watch these in sequential order just to see what they're doing here. So for this film too, Fennec's in the cast, and for the first half an hour you're wondering when she's going to pop up. And so when she actually pops up as the niece of Oliviero, it's kind of interesting just to see her enter, and from the get-go we know she's sort of playing a very different character than she does in the other in the All the Colors of Dark or Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. So she's having a lot more fun. She's the one that seems to be manipulating and controlling different characters. She seduces just about everyone in this film, from Strindberg to Pistilli. And so this is where it's kind of like, I wonder what's going on. I wonder who's playing who. You kind of expect at this point that the different twists are going to come. The third act is, in my opinion, just my favorite. The third act is the 10 out of 10, and it's the one that really makes the film. In fact, the first act is really not that much fun to watch. Very well executed, but not necessarily the most fun. In fact, it kind of reminds me of All the Colors of the Dark, where it's a little bit dreary. You're just spending a lot of time in this really shitty domestic relationship. Second act, where we get introduced to Fennec, it's starting to pick up a little bit and get going. The third act, where we finally get kind of the payoffs, and all twist after twist, the last 15 to 20 minutes is just fantastic, and it's just very, very satisfying the way everything is going on. So it's just a really, really great third act. I don't want to spoil everything. Well, I could spoil everything that's going on, but just the way that it twists and stuff like that. So we see kind of the Fennec character get revealed and her ultimate fate, and then we see Rasimov where he finally fits in. He's just been kind of showing up throughout, and when Ivan Rasimov is going on, there's some mystery tied with him that's going to go down. And so it's just really, really brilliant conceived. And so I like how this one concludes on like a really solid note. And it's almost the opposite of All the Colors of the Dark there, where kind of the really meaty, good stuff for that film is in the first and second act. And so I for me at least, this film leaves me with kind of a smile on my face just to see the way that Gastaldi and Martino have kind of drummed this up to create just a very, very great payoff. In fact, it might be the best payoffs of any of the Martino Gialli. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. Torso and Strange Vice would give it a run for its money, but I really, really like how this one concludes. I think the third act is just some of Martino's absolute best material. Okay, so on to a little bit more of kind of the supporting things with it. The Nicolai score is a very good one. It's a little bit more classical, a very, very, there's some piano notes and things like that in there. And these guys were just cranking out wonderful scores time after time. So it's not quite as iconic as maybe All the Colors of the Dark score, but it's still a really, really good score. I think this one too is another one that really emphasized to me kind of the Gothic background of the Giallo, and I think the Martino films in general emphasize that quite a bit. There's just a great usage of kind of this castle setting that we have here. The cinematography done by Giancarlo Ferrando, who did a lot of the work with Martino. Just some really, really strong images here, and the castle setting and the different ways you can light that and stuff just can have some really, really striking dark images when it's dark outside and even when it's light. So it's just really this kind of rich canvas for us to kind of see this domestic drama play out on. So I really, really like that. It also kind of gives this feeling of sort of like Pistilli and people like that as sort of like this decayed, intelligent class that is just kind of rotting away slowly. And we see the sort of decadence and sort of like the backplay between his wife and all the different players in there. So I think visually it's super, super strong. So I think this, All the Colors of the Dark, as well as Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, definitely have some strong Gothic tones, but I think this one might have the most of that. And again, I'm not big on Gothic Italian horror as much as other people are. And I'm also not big on Black Cat, but I think they're in just such the perfect dosage here that I really enjoy it. And in many ways, the kind of Gothic melodrama that was really popular in the 60s with like Baba's Black Sunday, those films are kind of the predecessors to these different Giallo films that took place here. You can see a little bit of an Argento, but I think it's even more present in some of these works from Sergio Martino. Okay, so who won the movie? Gonna give it to Sergio Martino. I think he just has some really strong direction here. It feels very focused and controlled. Even the first act, which in my opinion is not particularly fun, but it's really setting the groundwork and laying the breadcrumbs for where things are going to go. So I think this one is definitely kind of one of the more complete Giallos. A little bit more of a slow burn, but they sprinkle in a couple of those Argento type set pieces throughout to keep you kind of interested. Double feature, gonna pick one of my absolute favorite Giallis here, The Psychic. This is just a great Lucio Fulci one that's really unsung in my opinion. I love The Psychic. Another one that focuses on kind of like the domestic relationship between a woman and her husband, and takes a little bit more of a supernatural angle. If you're expecting like super lurid, super sleazy exploitation Fulci, it's not that, but it is a very, very good Giallo and probably in my top 3 or 4. So again, strongly recommend Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. It's not Strange Vice. I do recommend that film. So I strongly recommend Your Vice's Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. I don't know if I mentioned, but probably in my top 10 Giallis. Going to give this 8.5 out of 10. It's one where it just builds and builds and builds, and just again, the ending is so satisfying that it leaves a big smile on my face. Okay, thank you all for tuning in. Let me know how you like this film. Let me know how you like this review, and I will see you next time. Cheers.